Welcome to Channel X TV, sponsored by Volo. We're at the delivery conference today, and I'm delighted to be joined by Max O'Brien from Globally to talk a little bit about D2C commerce around the world. So, welcome, Max. How are you today?
Really good, thank you. Excited for the event and excited for this chat.
Great. Well, tell us just one sentence. What do Globally do?
So Globally is the leading platform in the market for helping brands with their international e-commerce. So from everything from website localization, currencies, payment options, logistics, outbound with shipping outbound and returns, and also helping with all the compliance that comes with selling to 200 different markets.
Now, I want to drive straight into the D2C part of e-commerce. Lots of companies have been kind of starting to sell direct to consumer, but in the pandemic it absolutely exploded when all the retail shops were shut. Everyone wanted to get onto D2C, but we're past the pandemic now. But what key trends do you kind of expect to see from the D2C world in 2024?
I think in terms of what we're seeing is the social media boom of COVID and everyone having fingertip access to brands all over the world has made anyone with an international kind of influencer or kind of aspect a global brand from day one. The big kind of countries that we're seeing that are really growing quickly are markets like the Middle East, so UAE, Saudi. Mexico is still the front runner on our market trends, where there's a growing middle class, growing economy there, and there's a huge appetite to buy internationally. So I think we're typically seeing more customers shop for general day-to-day bits from the marketplaces, and more customers wanting to go to their brand directly and get that experience from them, whether that's domestically or internationally.
Now, D2C is kind of very disruptive for those that have had a traditional manufacturer, distributor, retailer, whether it be an online retailer or a high street retailer. How should a brand move into the kind of the D2C world without totally decimating their retail channel and frankly upsetting their retail partners?
Yeah, no, we see a lot of that. I think especially from a lot of brands who are starting out and big well-known brands who are already selling. Typically getting access to a marketplace or your stock essentially into a big department store would always be the first point of call to get some eyes on the products. However, I mean, it goes back to the fact that everything is accessible now. If you can type in a product and you can see brands through search engines, social media, so there's no real barriers to entry on D2C. You can be exploring.
I think though in the past, as a consumer, I would have gone to a brand's website and I'd have chosen the product I wanted, and then they'd have had a sort of where to buy it button, find a local retailer or something, and now they're saying, oh, come and buy it from us direct, which, how do they actually support that retail channel still when I can go and buy direct?
I think a lot of brands are still keeping that channel open, but I think it's not too much of a hard barrier to create a relatively simple e-commerce website. The likes of Shopify, etc., are doing this with relative ease now. And then typically you'll have your stock location. The real challenges that we're seeing is how to do that for 200 countries rather than domestically.
That was my kind of next question, which is how do you do D2C in what is a globalised world where you might be lucky to get me buying from you living just outside of Reading, which is relatively easy. But what happens if it is someone from Saudi Arabia or the UAE or America or Australia? How do you actually cope with that?
I mean, that's largely why Globally exists. I mean, we see merchants be able to do it for a few markets, but being able to do it with the depth at which we can do it and which you need to do it is the ultimate ask. So one size does not fit all in the global e-commerce space. You've got different currencies, different payment options, different languages, different cultures to also attend to. So it's a really tough thing to be able to manage, especially on a global level. And realistically, that's why most of the biggest brands in the world are using Globally to help with that.
So digging down, for those watching this, when you're looking at launching in a new country, let's say you started doing D2C in the UK or a European country, and you now want to go global. You picked a territory, maybe it's the Middle East or it's America, which is relatively easy because the language isn't a problem, but where do you start from kind of your website, the checkout, the logistics. How do you actually launch D2C into a new territory?
Yeah, so I mean, there's typically quite a big budget that needs to be set aside for arguably one country. So there's all the localization, translation, localized currency. There's a lot of brands that do it without getting that in place first. Whereas if you're going to drive considerable marketing budgets to these new markets, which you have to when you're starting up a new market, you need to have the localized experience there from the front end. But then actually getting parcels, clearing customs, managing the local compliance in that market, it's not something maybe you as a brand see, but the customer will see that reverse from the other way. So, and at the end of the day, the carrier is almost, that experience on the door is very powerful. So if it's not clearing customs with duties paid, all of these elements, it can result in a poor experience for them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was going to ask the question, should I just let them come to my UK site and buy from you on my UK site? But then I've still got all of the customs and the logistics to worry about.
And also, I think over the years, that was fairly okay for big UK brands. You know, like there's the heritage, there's the quality, and people would pay in GBP, pay an FX percentage for that. But now
then the customs and duty bill when it's delivered to their doorstep.
Yeah, and they don't even know that necessarily when they're buying. So that's the ultimate surprise, which you should absolutely not do as a brand, because the shopper won't come back too frequently. But now, like localized currency and stuff like that is really important because people are aware of the FX impact of buying and getting charged in a different currency.
What we're talking about, sort of the payment side, Matt. What about the regulation side? What sort of insights can you offer for, like we've mentioned the Middle East.
Yeah.
What do I need to know regulation-wise for the Middle East? And is it different to sort of the more traditional English-speaking countries like UK, Ireland, Australia, US, Canada? Is it a similar set of structures, or is it totally different?
I think it's changing to become a lot more like European, US kind of payment network, but it's been quite archaic in that aspect. So the likes of Adyen, Stripe and WorldPay, big PSPs, are over there now selling kind of a modern day payment solution. But the difficulty is to get high authorization rates and the best kind of possible checkout experience. You need to have your banks and your entities all set up there domestically. So a brand to go and set up in the Middle East will have to go and set that all up themselves and then maintain it going forward.
And does that generally for a brand mean actually establishing a business entity in that country, or can they run it from their UK entity? What do they need to be aware of on that side?
It can vary depending on the market, but in the UAE you'd have to set up, or in the Middle East typically, you'd have to set up a UAE entity, and then you would essentially just transfer the goods from the UK stock pool that you've got into a UAE stock pool. The nice thing is with globally, the entity piece is all taken care of because it's a domestic setup.
Right. And what should a D2C brand be looking for a partner if they're serious about global expansion and they literally probably want to go worldwide? Maybe not 190 countries, but there may be sort of at least a couple of dozen countries they want to be hitting around the world.
I think there's lots of partners. I think really to do it well, you're looking at probably 10 to 12 providers to actually be able to replicate a strong global setup. The big thing that we see is that you can get the technology these days, but getting the know-how and the experience and the expertise is something you can't really buy. And that's something we're looking at leveraging now to help brands with. We've seen it work, this is what you should do. So there's lots of technology on the market now, and the big thing is having the experience and the knowledge to be able to put it into practice.
So for a brand that's looking for a really robust D2C strategy, and let's say they've already cracked it in the UK, what are the first things they should consider when going overseas? Should they be cherry picking countries, or should they be cherry picking a region and doing a set of countries in that region, even if some are not quite as profitable as countries in another region? What kind of strategies should they be thinking about? That's obviously, times are tough. We need to maximise both sort of revenues and profits.
Yeah.
So how do you attack that?
I think in terms of, you'd first be looking at where your traffic's coming from. Even if you're not transacting there, you'll have traffic based on your products, typically where are other brands popular. But you know, to go and set all of this stuff up and cherry pick a few markets is going to cost you a lot of money up front. Times are, you know, significantly harder at the moment, so a lot of brands are looking at a solution like Globally, which is a plug-in with no upfront fees and just turning on all of these markets with the infrastructure you need. So even the biggest brands are looking at cutting cost. The smaller brands are looking at how can they scale efficiently. The solution lends itself to every merchant.
So tell me a little bit more about Globally, because this is sounding interesting, especially when you say no upfront cost, it's a plug-in. For a D2C brand that comes to you, what can they expect? What can you do for them? How does the commissions work? And how quickly can they get up and running?
I mean, typically during a sales process, there's obviously a scoping of what does the project look like, where are their warehouses, etc. But from our side, there we don't charge an integration cost. There is potential integration fees on their end, depending on the platform. But if you look at a lot of the major platforms, we've got pre-built cartridges. So essentially, you know, we can do out of the box 85% of the integration without heavy lifting and integration fees needed. And then essentially, you know, in terms of around 4 to 6 weeks on a decent enterprise merchant is around an aggressive timeline. 8 weeks is more of a happier path. But the nice part is that once you've done it, it's fully up and running for all those countries. You don't have to repeat it again.
And what's the implication for a brand in terms of internal team? If they're doing D2C in the UK, they're obviously going to have a direct sales team, but how much expansion do they need when they do start going overseas? Can they expand the UK team, or do they need teams in each individual country? How much of the heavy lifting can you actually do for them to minimise headcount?
Yeah, I think headcount's a big thing. I mean, even when you speak to a brand, they still don't really understand the impact that maybe their team have on the day-to-day that Globally would bring in and manage. I mean, in terms of when you get to a large enough scale, having teams on the ground obviously makes sense. If you've got, you know, retail there, you've got B2B agreements, you know, it's not just a D2C discussion. But I think, yeah, it's, you know, if you look at it, you need to have a logistics director, you need to have imports and exports, you know, kind of manager who's checking your SKU catalogue to make sure the codes are all correct, that duties are being correctly billed. You've then got a finance team to manage all of the different compliance. It's a team of 10 to 20 people, depending on the size of the brand, that you need to be looking at, and you've got to have that from day one.
And is that per country, or can that team handle multiple countries? When do you start saying, okay, we're doing really well in the Middle East, I've got to have a Middle East team, or actually we're doing so well in Saudi, I need a Saudi Arabia team? When does those?
It depends on the brand, and obviously their budgets and what they're looking to do. I mean, we see a mixture, like the big global brands like Adidas that we work with out of Dubai, they have, you know, they've got their kind of local distribution over there. But I mean, in terms of when is it the right time to have teams on the ground, it depends on your kind of your budgets and your kind of play outside of D2C, I think.
So, Max, I want to thank you for your time today, but people watching this, they're going to want to know how to get hold of more information. So how do they get hold of you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it go to the Globally website? Is it email? What's the best way of getting in touch?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, so Max O'Brien, O''Brien, it gets spelled wrong a lot.
Oh, B-R-I-E-N.
B-R-I-E-N. But or contact, you know, go on the www.globally.com-e.com, and you can inquire through.
And we'll make it easy. We'll put Max's LinkedIn just below the video for you.
And my email as well. Yeah.
Max, thank you so much for your time.